What's poppin'? Hi, welcome to today's episode of True Crime Tuesdays, where I tell you a true crime case that I've been thinking about for a little bit while you guys get ready with me for the day. So, welcome to our first ever episode of True Crime Tuesdays. Yeah! Woo! Alright, so today we're going to talk about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Now, I know we've probably heard this story a lot, which is fair because it has been done quite a bit. It was a really popular case. I remember I was in college and I was like, dang, this case is insane. So, now real quick before we get started, this case does have mentions of child abuse, murder, violence, as well as sexual assault and addiction. So if any of those subjects are triggering for you, please take care of you, do what you have to do, and I'll see you on the next one. Now, Miss Gypsy Rose Blanchard was given a 10-year sentence. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for the death of her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. She was assisted by her boyfriend, Nick Godejohn. Yeah, I figured out how to pronounce it. I feel really great about that, actually. Anyways, now, this case is crazy in a lot of ways because the things that this girl had to endure were crazy. But I will say this. I feel like the only way to actually save her life was getting caught, if that makes sense. I don't agree with anything that was done here because in this channel we don't condone violence. We're not good with harming other people and hurting other people. That is not what we're about. What I'm saying is that if you look at the actual situation that she was in, even after escaping from her mom and after everything happened, she probably would have had a really bad life even if she wouldn't, like if she would have just stayed there. Because from my understanding, Nick was pretty twisted. According to Gypsy herself. These are, now, everything here has been researched and it is also from documentaries that Gypsy herself has been a part of. And on that note, let's go ahead and get started. Alrighty, Miss Gypsy Rose Blanchard was born on July 27th, 1991. So remember that, 91. To Dee Dee and Rod Blanchard. Now, Dee Dee and Rod had been dating for about 3 months when Dee Dee came to Rod and told him, hey, I'm pregnant. And Rod was like, okay, cool, let's get married. And they got married, and then that did not work out. So, what happened after that, you may ask? Well, right after that, Rod was with Dee Dee for about 3 months, and then he decided that they should divorce because he was actually not in love with Dee Dee. He married her because he felt like it was the right thing to do, but not because he actually wanted to be with her. And that is not a future that he wanted to have for himself, which is valid. Again, Rod was pretty young. He was young. Sorry, I can't say young for some reason today. It's fine. We're thriving. It's good. Rod considered that if he was with someone, he should be in love with them and see a future with them. And with Dee Dee, it was almost like he married her because he felt like that was the right thing to do. And seeing how unhappy he actually was later on in the relationship, he decided to make that choice. So, good on him. Dee Dee, let's talk a little bit about her. Now, Dee Dee had a bit of a history with lying and making up stories as well as stealing from her family members. She also had a history of writing bad checks, and she did have a few charges and did go to prison from what I understand because of some of those things. The only problem was that Dee Dee started to, it was almost like overprotect Gypsy. She started to take her to doctor's appointments and say that she was sick. This started from the moment that Gypsy was about 3 months old. She took her to the doctor because she said that she had sleep apnea, which at 3 months old, I mean, I understand, you know, especially because when they're babies, like anything can, they're so new to the world. It's like, but Dee Dee was actually being a bit obsessive with this, which is not a good thing. It's not a good look, honestly. Now, Dee Dee also had a history of working as a nurse at some point in her life. And according to her parents, she was actually really smart. And if she would have, you know, her life would have taken a different direction, she probably would have been a great nurse because she was a natural born caretaker. However, her family did start to suspect a few things. Now, allegedly, Gypsy had told a family member that Dee Dee used Roundup weed killer in her stepmother's food, which you can see right there. Something ain't right. Something ain't right. When Gypsy shared this with the family member, they confront her grandfather actually confronted. My research was saying like 7 or 8, but Gypsy herself stated that at 5 years of age, she was involved in a motorcycle accident with her grandfather where she suffered minor injuries. There wasn't anything major, nothing big, but from that moment on, Dee Dee forced her to use a wheelchair. She told her that she could no longer walk and that she was to use the wheelchair. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if my mom tells me to do something, at least in my house, I had to do it. If I didn't do it, yeah, y'all know what happens. So Dee Dee had her use the wheelchair from that point forward. Now, along with the way that Dee Dee was raising Gypsy and doing things for her, she also, as I mentioned, she had that history of theft already, so that was still going on. She was also still writing bad checks. Eventually, Gypsy and Dee Dee move out of their grandparents' home and they go to their own place. This only allowed Dee Dee to have more control over Gypsy, which is in the end what she wanted. In Dee Dee's eyes, it was almost like she was taking care of Gypsy, but if you look at it from an outside perspective, friends and family started telling Dee Dee that she was being a bit excessive with the way she was treating Gypsy. She wouldn't let her play with other kids. If there were family parties and kids were playing outside or on the trampoline, Gypsy was not allowed to do that. She would be stuck in her wheelchair. Now, this is the family knowing that Gypsy can walk, Gypsy can talk, like everything's fine with her, but Dee Dee's the one who's like, no, she can't do that. So she wouldn't let her, which sucks. Like, imagine going to, like, being like 6 and there's a kids party and they're all playing on the trampoline and you're just sitting there and you can't go partake. Like, that freaking sucks. I don't know, man. Dee Dee and Gypsy moved to New Orleans and settled in Slidell, and they were actually living off of public housing disability checks that Gypsy would receive, as well as the child support that Rod was still sending them. Remember that. That's key. Now, Gypsy was Dee Dee continued to take Gypsy to doctor's appointments and specialists, stating that Gypsy was sick. The latest revelation, I guess, in her medical history was that Gypsy suffered from epileptic seizures. So the doctors actually prescribed her with a seizure medication for that condition. All right, let's fast forward. It is now 2005. Now, as we know, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, destroying thousands of homes. Among those homes, unfortunately, was the household where Gypsy and Dee Dee were living. Now, this completely destroyed everything in the house, including medical records and personal documents. So things like their social security cards, their birth certificates, everything was lost in Katrina. Guess what? Dee Dee used this to her advantage. Now what she did is, because there were no longer any medical records and there were just no traces of Gypsy's birth, she could essentially change her birthday, as well as create this whole different personality. After Katrina, Gypsy and Dee Dee were advised to go back to Missouri, and they actually had a house built for them by Habitat for Humanity. This house was a beautiful house with a wheelchair ramp that Gypsy could access. It also had wider doorways for her wheelchair to fit through. It also had like it was just personalized to their need. It was a gorgeous house, and it was completely free because it was made by volunteers. This part kind of made me mad, honestly, because I started thinking of like, dang, like how many people actually need this and they don't have the access to it, and these people got it for free. It was like, just, I don't know. There's a lot of things that frustrate me, but I'll be honest, that's one of the big ones that I was like, this fucking sucks, man. Like, it was a lot easier for Dee Dee to manipulate doctors and specialists with Gypsy's medical history now that there were no records existing. Now, I'm going to just read a few things that Gypsy was allegedly suffering from. There we go. Okay, now, Gypsy's health struggles. She couldn't walk. She had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, sleep apnea. She was also anemic, and they actually removed her salivary glands, like her salival glands. They tore that shit out. Why? Dee Dee was like, take them out. Dee Dee would actually complain of excessive drooling, and so what they did is just remove her salivary glands, which is, according to what I was researching, very, very painful. The other really, really horrible thing that was done to Gypsy was that her mother actually stated that she couldn't eat either, so she actually had a feeding tube implanted right here on her stomach. So she has a little feeding tube right here that needs to be changed. I think it's like every month or every so often that they would change it. But the reason why Dee Dee said that she needed that was because Gypsy could not eat. Now, Dee Dee continued to milk her daughter's condition in order to continue receiving not only emotional support, but she also received financial support. You can see pictures of them going to Disney World, paid flights to their specialists. They would also get free passes or VIP passes to concerts. There's actually pictures. Specifically, the one I saw was with Miranda Lambert, where they got like these backstage passes to watch her concert. Now, keep in mind, she's getting all of this financial support from, foundations, and she gets disability for Gypsy's conditions. She's also still getting the $1,200 child support from Rod. However, she's still keeping up with that lie that Rod is just not in Gypsy's life at all and limits how much Gypsy can talk to Rod, which is, again, terrible. So it could have saved so many people, man, but it is what it is. Now, all of the things that Dee Dee would force Gypsy to do were really, really crazy. She would also actually shave her head bald to make her seem like a cancer patient. When Gypsy was 14 is when Katrina hit, and that's when they moved to Michigan. Now, Gypsy by that point, as I said, was 14, but Dee Dee would tell people she was 12. And not only would she do that, she also started to tell Gypsy that her life expectancy was of 20, and then like a few more years would pass and she'd be like, oh no, it's 22 or 21 or whatever. She was not only fucking with her own neighbors' minds, but she was fucking with her daughter's mind, physically, mentally, emotionally. Like, it's all these different types of abuse that were going on to Gypsy. It's just terrible. Now, according to Gypsy herself, allegedly she was also molested by her grandfather at a very young age, but she never felt like she could talk openly about that to her mother. She did mention it at some point, but the only thing that it did was just make Dee Dee feel completely guilty. Her grandfather has actually denied these accusations, but Gypsy, according to her, remembers clearly that this did happen to her. So that does not help at all. This girl's just getting constantly fucked in the head, whether it's her mom, it's her grandpa, it's just, and everyone around her, like, fuck, it would suck, man. Like, you have to use a wheelchair, you have to have your head shaved, you have to use a feeding tube, you have to take all these medications that you really don't need. And the crazy thing is just how much manipulation Dee Dee was able to get away with because of the loss of those medical records in Katrina, as well as her forging a few documents. Like, the amount of manipulation in this case just blows my mind every single time, bro. I can't. Gypsy was tested for cancer and muscular dystrophy after Katrina in Missouri. Now, all of her levels and tests came back normal. Here's the thing. I'm going to say that again. All of her tests and levels were normal, but the doctors still did not report anything to CPS. Now, according to the research that I did, there was only one doctor who was actually suspecting some mistreatment happening to Gypsy. And that doctor did actually make a report to CPS, but he did not follow up on the progress of the case to see if anything was done. He just reported it, and that was it. I don't know where my comb is, so we're just gonna wing it. We'll see how this goes. If you look at Gypsy, you find recordings and videos of her when she was younger. Gypsy would play off this cute, adorable, innocent little girl with a extremely high-pitched voice. She was also dressed in Disney princess costumes, and she actually loved to go to conventions. Dee Dee would just wheel her around in her wheelchair, and Gypsy would be dressed in this, adorable Disney princess costume or a Yoda costume of some sort. Like, she would just be, she would love those conventions because it allowed her to be someone else other than what she was. And her life, as we know, was pretty rough. So having that opportunity to dress up and be in the real world with other people was really great for Gypsy. Something really surprising that I didn't know had happened to Gypsy is that she was actually addicted to pain medication. That is something that I had never heard of. But Gypsy herself expressed her struggles with the pain medications. In order to appear sick, Dee Dee would sedate her pretty badly to make her look like she was, legit sick and dying. The other thing that Dee Dee would do is that she would put Orajel in her gums to make her drool. The only way Gypsy could endure all of this emotional abuse that was happening to her was living in a fantasy world. Now, something I didn't know was that Gypsy was actually hooked on pain pills. I shouldn't say hooked, sorry. I'm gonna say that again. Now, keep in mind, not only is Gypsy consuming these painkillers, but also Dee Dee is sedating her to make her seem more sick than she actually is. Terrible combination. In prison, she continued to have an addiction to whatever she could find. She kept experimenting with different drugs, and she was actually asking her family to send her money to feed this addiction until eventually she came clean. And according to her later years, she did get clean eventually from all of that, which good for her, because that's not an easy thing to do. Heard of or really knew that was happening was that Gypsy was actually addicted to pain pills. This addiction started around age 16, according to her. Now, allegedly, she mentions that these pills took her to a different reality. But as her tolerance grew, she started to take higher doses of these medications, and eventually it just became a full-on addiction. They had so many medications in the house that they were always just very easily accessible to Gypsy. As Gypsy grew older, she started to go through the changes, right? She wants to make friends. She wants to go out. She has hormones going through her body. You know, she wants to have a boyfriend. She wants to go on dates. She wants to have a social life. Unfortunately, Dee did not allow Gypsy to do this. She did not allow her to have friends. She also did not allow her to play outside with kids her age. She would let her talk to kids her age, but I mean, keep in mind, if Gypsy's 14 by now, Dee's telling everyone she's 12, so Gypsy's surrounded by 12-year-olds, and it's like, no. Imagine being 12 around, imagine being 14 around 12-year-olds. It's just, nah, bro. Now, Gypsy and Dee had a joint Facebook account that Dee would update. She, on there, would add pictures of them at conventions and just give people updates on Gypsy's health conditions, if there were any, you know, updates on that. So it was great because that way people could know what was going on with Gypsy. Again, it was all a lie, but okay. I'm really bad at eyeshadow, guys, so just bear with me. There is history of Gypsy running away. The first attempt was with now Gypsy was at a convention and she met a man named Dan. At that point, Gypsy was 19, but again, Dee would change her age all the freaking time. So Gypsy's 19, this guy's 36. When she found this guy, they just really hit it off at a convention. You know, they started a conversation and they would talk about TV shows and, you know, animated things, and it was a really good way for Gypsy to socialize, and eventually she started to grow feelings for this man. The other thing that happened around this time was that Gypsy found her Medicaid card, and on that card she saw her real age. So from that point on, Gypsy confronted her mother and asked her, hey, how old am I? Like, what's my real age? And Dee mentioned that Medicaid had messed up her date of birth because their documents were lost during Katrina. Which, again, dude, the amount of stuff that this woman could get away with, it's freaking insane. Gypsy eventually came up with a plan to escape with Dan. However, here's where it gets really sad for her, because so she comes up with this plan. She steals some money from her mom, and she takes, you know, her pain meds that she's hooked onto, and she decides to escape with Dan. However, Dan hadn't been completely honest with her. Dan was apparently on parole and couldn't leave the state. Now, this is after Dan promised Gypsy that if she ran away with him, he could protect her and they could flee the state. That was not true. It sucks, man. She was trying to find any way out of these situations, and it almost seems like the people she was encountering outside of her mom were like worse because they couldn't really help her. So it just... Eventually, Dee found Gypsy. She found the cell phone that she was using to communicate with Dan and tracked her down. Once she found Gypsy, she told her that if she went back home, she would let her see Dan. So Gypsy, of course, obliged and went back home. But as soon as they got home, Dee presented Gypsy with a copy of her birth certificate. It wasn't a copy. It was like it wasn't a copy of the real one, if that makes sense. She like I said, she forged documents and she manipulated the heck out of this situation. And unfortunately, Gypsy did believe her mom when she saw that birth certificate. Now, once they arrived back home, Dee actually chained Gypsy to the bed with handcuffs and a dog leash for 2 weeks. She also neglected feeding her as a form of punishment for Gypsy escaping. She also, according to Gypsy, slept with a knife next to her bed and would threaten Gypsy that if she moved or if she tried to run away again, that she would hurt her. Another thing that Gypsy claimed happened was that Dee put a voodoo hex on Dan and Gypsy, and she told Gypsy that she would never find love. Now, when asked by people if her mother loved her, Gypsy states that Dee Dee did love her, but in her own way. I think that's the way that she tries to understand where the abuse came from, which is terrible. You shouldn't have to do that, honestly. Now, according to Gypsy, there was another situation where she tried to escape and actually shot at her mother about 10 times. Now, she was using the gun that Dee Dee had bought to try to scare Gypsy, and Gypsy just pulled the trigger. She shot her about 10 times. After seeing the damage and the injuries, Gypsy found out that Dee Dee had purchased a BB gun. The other thing that Dee Dee did to scare Gypsy was that she bought a BB gun, and she would threaten Gypsy with it. Now, eventually, Gypsy had other runaway attempts. Where she would try to leave, but Dee Dee would always catch her. The other thing that happened is that Dee Dee actually purchased a gun to try to scare Gypsy into submission. Unfortunately, the only thing that this did for Gypsy was kind of give her a little bit, like another way to threaten Dee Dee, so to speak. There was another situation. Oh my god, I can't. When asked how she had gotten those injuries, Dee Dee explained that it was a attempted robbery and that the person trying to attack her had a BB gun, and that's how she got those injuries. Now, all of the repression and frustration and anger that Gypsy had started piling up and started getting worse and worse, to the point where she couldn't really control it anymore. The outbursts and the arguments started to get a lot more violent in nature. Now, with the move that they made back to Missouri, Gypsy actually made friends with a few neighbors, and one of those neighbors actually almost became like a big sister figure for her. So Gypsy starts making fake Facebook profiles, and what she would do is she would wait until her mother would go to sleep, and she would stay up and talk to people on Facebook throughout the night with these fake Facebook profiles. Now, as I mentioned, Gypsy's getting to that age where she just wants to, she wants to experiment. She wants to know what it's like to have a boyfriend. So what does she do? She decides to sign up for a dating website. Now, what I thought was ironic was that she signed up for a Christian, like she signed up on a Christian dating website, and that's how she found Nicholas Godejohn. Now, Nicholas Godejohn was a crazy. He's kind of an interesting cat. Now, Gypsy wants to continue exploring, and she's at that age where she wants to have a boyfriend. She wants to have a social life. So what does she do? She signs up for a dating website. That's what she signs up for. Sorry, this is really hard. Oh my god. Now, on this Christian dating website is where she finds Nicholas Godejohn. Yeah, I googled how to pronounce that. Thank you. Gypsy and Nick made it official after 2 weeks. However, Gypsy started receiving messages from his ex-girlfriend saying that he was violent and controlling. Gypsy decided to ignore these messages, unfortunately. The other thing that Gypsy did was she bought a burner phone to continue communicating with Nick outside of social media. She found a sort of relief in this alternate reality she had created for herself. She assumed, because that's what she grew up seeing, that her life was going to be like a fairy tale, that she was, you know, she was just a princess, a damsel in distress that was going to be saved by her Prince Charming. And she saw Nick as that figure. Now, unfortunately, Nick was not that person. He, early on in the relationship, stated that he was interested in BDSM, and he also had a sort of obsession with sexuality. Nick also had charges from the state of Wisconsin for watching stuff he shouldn't in McDonald's, out of all places. Why the fuck would you go to okay, sorry, I don't know, maybe he wanted to make sure he had chicken nuggets after. I don't fucking know, people are nuts. Now, unfortunately for Gypsy, she started to cave into Nick's more intense dark fantasies, because that's what she felt that she should do as his girlfriend. She would actually role play and record herself with different wigs and different personalities, because that is what Nick requested of her. So what she wanted was Nick to meet her mother. So she and Nick set up a plan for them to meet at a movie theater. Now, it's 2015, and around that time is when that live action version of Cinderella came out. So Gypsy dressed up in this gorgeous Cinderella costume, and she made the plan for Nick and her mother to meet. Now, once they arrived at the movie theater, Dee Dee was not impressed by Nick at all. She thought he was a weirdo, and she actually threatened him to stay away from them. She was very rude to Nick. But here's the thing with Nick. I forgot to mention, Nick was in the spectrum, and he also had a few personality disorders. That's not confirmed. Supposedly he had I think it's like dissociative personality disorder or something like that. And he claimed he had multiple personalities. He had a normal side, which was, you know, Nick, and he had the darker side named Victor. Now, Victor was very violent. He also said that Victor was a 500-year-old vampire. Okay. Yo, eyeliner is like one of the hardest things to do. Okay, I am dying. I'm gonna stop. Oh my gosh. Okay, they don't have to be sisters, just close cousins. It's fine. I can't. We did it, I think. I don't know. We'll see. It's fine. Now, so Dee Dee wouldn't lose control over Gypsy, she actually created a power of attorney that basically gave her complete control over Gypsy's life, because Gypsy was not competent to make her own decisions. It sucks. Gypsy just couldn't find a way out. She's like, I don't even know what to do. Gypsy literally felt like there was no way out of this. Like, it sucks, man. She just felt trapped. Now, the only solution that Gypsy felt she had was, unfortunately, murder. So, from that point on, Gypsy and Nick started planning the death of Dee Dee. So they start to make plans to murder Dee Dee. Gypsy started researching different ways to end her mother's life. They were kind of looking at possibilities like poisoning or arson, but none of that seemed to work for them. In the end, they wound up deciding on stabbing. Now, the plan was that Nick was the one who was actually going to execute the act itself, but the person doing the research and planning everything out was Gypsy. So she didn't pull the trigger, but she did help plan it, which unfortunately not good. So Gypsy asked for the assistance of Victor, which again was Nick's bad side. The 500-year-old vampire. Yep. Yeah, weird. Now, once they agreed on a method, Gypsy found the means. So she actually stole, according to Gypsy, she stole the knife from a Walmart. She also paid for Nick to come She paid for his trip, for his motel, everything. And the plan was that Nick would arrive at Gypsy's house, and Gypsy would give him the green light essentially to enter, and he would do what he had to do. Now, the plan was that Gypsy would be in contact with Nick, and she would let him know when it was okay for him to enter the home. And then after that, Nick would do what he was gonna do. And then Nick and Gypsy would flee after that. So the day comes, and Nick arrives at Gypsy's house and tells her to hide in the bathroom so she doesn't hear anything. Now, Gypsy hides in the bathroom, and that is when he attacks. Now, Nick stabs Dee Dee a total of 17 times, and during the process, Dee Dee cried out Gypsy's name quite a few times and was asking for help. Gypsy was hiding in the bathroom at her boyfriend's request. I don't know. I feel very shook that the IP address is what got them caught. Yeah. Anyways, all right. So Nick's parents' house was raided, and they eventually turned themselves in and were separated to be interrogated by police. Now, again, during the interrogation tapes, guys, those are rough. Gypsy not only kept the lie going that she didn't know what was happening, but she also kept the lie about her age. She's acting almost childish. She acts surprised, and she cries when she's told that her mom is dead, and she just starts spiraling from that point on. She also does a lot of victim playing. I understand, like, I'm trying to be like PC about this, but I'll be honest, those tapes pissed the shit out of me. Like, I had to take like a minute after seeing that interrogation, because it changed my perspective in a lot of things to see the way that she was reacting. I couldn't. Dude, I'm gonna tell you right now, those the interrogation tapes are nuts. I saw most of Gypsy's, and I was kind of shocked, man. I was really mad and I was really frustrated that she just kept lying. The first half hour of her is just her just lying and continuing with everything and saying that she didn't know everything. She did lie to the officer and told them, her fake age. And this is the thing. She knew she wasn't that age, but, at that point, she's probably just trying to do what she can to save herself. I don't know, man. I don't know. Stuff's crazy. I'm really trying to fix this side of my hair. These aren't bangs, but they're not bangs. They're bangs, but they're not bangs. They're like fake bangs, and I dig them, but styling them has been a process. So yeah, this is interesting. I don't know how we're gonna do this. It's fine. So Gypsy pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison with the possibility of parole. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So, okay, that's her sentence. Nick's sentence, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder, and an additional 25-year sentence for armed criminal action. Now, in the state of Missouri, first-degree murder can get you either a death penalty or life without parole. Gypsy was able to secure a plea bargain and pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder charge. She got really lucky. Now, this is where I'm saying that them getting caught essentially saved her life, because if she would have stayed with Nick, according to her, he had very violent tendencies, and he did a lot of things to her that she was not comfortable with. Among those, just forcing the BDSM on her and just everything else that was going on would have essentially been her downfall. Like, if she would have just stayed with him forever, she would have been fucked. She would not have had that happy life that she thought she was going to have. Now, the aftermath of all of this, Nick is still in prison. Again, he has a life sentence. Gypsy was released on parole in 2023, and ever since then she has been giving interviews and books and just talking more about her side of the story. She also was able to create a solid relationship with her father and his side of the family. She never had that opportunity, unfortunately, while her mother was alive. So I'll say good for her for having that chance to finally be able to connect with her father. She did marry Ryan Anderson, which we all know. We all know what happened there. Yeah, like her. Now, in 2023, she was released on parole. Ever since then, she has been writing books. She gives interviews and talks a little bit more about her side of the story. She also got married while in prison, but shortly divorced her husband, Ryan Anderson, right after being released on parole. And she actually rekindled her relationship with her ex-partner, Ken Erger. They actually have a child now, too. Good for them, I guess. I don't know. The way that she's been acting since she's been off parole, because her parole ended, what, like maybe a month ago? I don't know how to feel. I mean, we're not perfect, right? But, God, like, I don't know. It almost seems like there's just this lack of accountability that's always going to be there. And unfortunately, you know, that's probably never going to change. Now, just a quick reminder, we don't condone any kind of violence or harm against another person in any way, shape, or form on this channel. The sole purpose of me doing these videos is just sharing an interest that I like with other people. Always open to suggestions. Please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe if you are so inclined. I just said like, follow, and subscribe. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I do take suggestions. Please do. This is my very first video, and I'm very excited to start on this journey. This true crime's been a hobby for a little bit, but I've never done anything like this. So I'm super open to suggestions and comments and feedback. Please leave it, because I've never done anything. This stuff isn't easy. So, like, all power to you if you're doing any kind of true crime content, because this stuff is really intense, and I hadn't realized how much you have to research, you know, to make sure you get the truth and the best information possible. It's a lot. It's a lot to see and digest, and man, all power to anyone who does this, because this is insane. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. As always, please don't be a shitty person. Be a nice human and take care of you. Bye.